What's up? Well, anyhow, I'm going to try and put some things to rest about some stuff about, Netflix pulling an episode of Hassan Minhaj episode. I guess that's a Patriot Act to pull it because there's legal ramifications hitting Netflix from Saudi Arabia. uh, well, I think that that's just another source of their control and another reason for them to do things like that. I guess would be to try and well keep people from being offended. And well, there's kind of a fine line drawn there. You know, offense plus the ability to be offended. That's sort of kind of how comedy was generated. Okay, that they're going to offend people in a comedic platform. You know, I don't think Hassan Minhaj is trying to do things in such a way to offend people for no purpose or reason. I think it's just the opposite of that in some ways. I don't think he means it in a way that's going to offend someone, to offend them just for the sake of doing it. But maybe sometimes that is the case. I just want to bring my thoughts out there on this, that, comedy is a very, very difficult field to put the hands around the neck of the comedian. It's pretty much, it's not a good thing to do. For one, that violates freedom of speech, number one. And number two, if there is offensive content, then that's what the editor is for, and that's what the writer's purpose is, to try and make the same point through subtlety without being so over the top. That might be the case there. In some ways, I think that, you know, most of us have to basically come to terms with that. You know, if we're going to be comedians or to try and bring light to things that are otherwise very dark, it's going to happen. You're going to offend someone. You're going to offend somebody out there, and there's nothing you can do about that. And there's nothing wrong with being offended. By no means am I saying there's anything wrong with being offended. I'm putting my sunglasses back on, it's too bright. There's nothing wrong with being offended. You know, that's how you know that maybe they're hitting home with some of their topics, that the offensive nature of what they talk about, maybe they need to do it a different way, but by no means does that give anyone the right to silence a voice, no matter how offensive or loud that voice may be. A good example of that would be the lecture hall in which Jordan Peterson was trying to give his talk during some of the protests that were happening during the C-16 bill issues that he was having last year. The issues that were occurring, well, I should say the year before last, really, but it did carry him through all the way through last year, 2018, with quite a bit of fame from that, and because he was controversial in his thought processes, or seemed controversial, but I'm here to lay that to rest too. I think that the reasons that Jordan Peterson came to the opposition of Bill C-16 was because of its regulation and mandated speech. That's not something that needs to happen. We don't need to mandate certain words to be used. That's not good. First off, that you can ban certain words or mandate certain words, it would be control of speech, and that violates the freedom of speech, which in turn violates our amendments given to us by the creators of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So the authors of this set of documents had that in mind. They knew that tyranny would spring up, that it could exist in the future, and they made certain reparations in those documents to counteract that tyranny. And anyone who tries to control what people say in such a way that they mandate law into being what would you say, a gag in this instance, to try and stop people from saying certain things. We're seeing that occur on every facet of social media these days. We're seeing that occur on YouTube. We're seeing that occur on different forms especially Patreon now is starting to pull funding from certain people who are outspoken in different ways. Well, by different ways, I mean dissenting views from the popular view, or what seems to be, or what they deem popular or proper in that sense, in that regard. I don't think there's anything wrong with having an opposing viewpoint. I think that's how we formulate discourse in our world, and when we formulate conversation, which is another word for discourse, around a discussion. Having a discussion between two different parties or polar opposites would be discourse, and this conversation needs to occur for us to make legitimate laws and to make legitimate attempts to try and guide society in such a way that would be for the betterment of the rest of us, not the detriment. And regulating speech in that regard, at that level, is only to our detriment. It's not to our betterment. It is complete debasement of what we call our Bill of Rights and Constitution if we allow this to occur in our own country, which it's well on its way. So, I mean, if it isn't already here. I mean, I don't know how on touch I am or on pulse I am with that, but I do believe that there are some issues here that we need to resolve. And you can't do that. You can't resolve issues unless you can have conversations about them, unless you can talk about them. There's no resolution met when there can't be a conversation made. When things can't occur in a courtroom, in a conversation, you need to have public forum where those things can be brought to light and those things can be aired in public, and then we can all get our views around each other and say, well, I don't agree with this point, but I see where you're taking it. Well, I don't agree with this particular end of that point, but I see that this is an issue and that we need to resolve it. Now, that's the only way you can do this, and the only way you can do any of the resolution or meet any sort of resolve in this way or in this manner is by having free speech. And it's really important for us to understand that. The reason that this is so important is because they can come for us next. They can come for any one of us next. I don't think that there's anything more to be said about it than that. It really is a very appalling time we live in, and in some cases it's a very interesting and a very exciting time to live. But I also want everyone to have a wonderful 2019. It's going to be a great year for us. I don't think it's going to be a bad year like some people say. It's going to be the end of America. I disagree with you. I think that if we are noticing a slip or a slide in that direction, then we as American people owe it to ourselves and to our what would you call it? I'm going to use a word here that may not fit perfectly, but I'm going to say our progeny would rise to inherit the world we create for them. And the mess we're going to leave is going to be in direct detriment to their progress if we can't hold this together and try to figure this out ourselves. And it's going to be a very difficult thing to do, but it needs to be done. It needs to be done. It doesn't need to be cast away to the next group of people or left for the progeny to solve this issue. We need to do it now. And resolutions and solutions are present. The only thing we have to do is look for them in the right place and formulate views and ideas that can answer the call to the solution that we require. And we can't do any of this without speech. Dysregulation of this sort of thing needs to occur. We don't need regulation in speech to that level. I don't think the government has really any business regulating speech in that regard. I think that's a very, very slippery slope, and it's a double-edged sword. It's a very sharp one. I don't think it's a very smart idea for us to let that occur in our own country or to allow that to be an occurrence in our country. America has, been a pretty powerful contender in the world as far as I can remember. Throughout history, we've been as but as powerful as the Roman Empire used to be. Maybe even still exists to this day. I'm not exactly certain what powers that be are in control still, but I know that whoever runs the world, whoever holds those keys, was in power then and is in power now. The illusion is there is a choice. The illusion that there is a shell game going on. That's what the illusion is. They're putting new shells over the same old trick, and it's hard to explain this in any other way without getting my video cut, but I do want people to see that the issue isn't the fact that we have these rights and we need to fight for them, and we need to do whatever we can to maintain the validity and competence level to know what validity is and why the Constitution is important and why the Bill of Rights is important. Because it doesn't just apply to you and me. It doesn't just apply to the American people. It applies to all people. Because those some of them are inalienable rights that were given to us by the Creator, that were given to us by divine presence, and some of those rights, inalienable or otherwise, are being violated today in a rapid succession, going down the line from one to another, and it's happening more and more as we progress further in the years. I get this question a lot too. What do I see being the downfall of America? And what would be the downfall of our country? And I think the downfall has already occurred. That the downfall, we're currently experiencing it. That the death of our country has already occurred, at least in the sense of the public forum. I think the military is the last place that will feel this detriment because they hold a much better governmental structure than our public existence has. And corporations don't control the military. They don't own the military. The military, in and of itself, is its own entity, aside from our government, and operates separately from our government, and yet is controlled by some people from the government, the higher ups. There is some issue there with politics and control, mainly among the top generals and stuff like that at the Pentagon and so forth and so on. There are some control matters to be resolved, but I do believe that the military personnel have a more working knowledge of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights being directly adhered to their way of being. And the soldiers themselves feel obligated to maintain the active life and viability of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights for every citizen. That's part of the oath, against both enemies, foreign and domestic. That's not just a saying there. They really believe that, and that's a good thing, because coming from a long line of military personnel myself, I've gotten to know the military side of things rather personally, and there are some things that that could go a little crazy, get things to go sideways, just depending on your viewpoint, but that's to the discretion and the decision of the rulers in power, or the generals, or the admirals, whoever runs things in that sense, in that regard. It's left up to the superior officer. In that case, the soldiers do what they are told. They follow orders. Now, in most cases, they do. When there's a situation that arises where a soldier is told to directly violate the constitutional rights and liberties afforded them by citizenship, that's where the conflict within arises, and the soldier will not act upon those orders, not immediately, and in some cases I hope they never do. That posse comitatus is not something that is a real it's a real bad thing if that were brought to the floor, basically wiped off from their regulations. If that were the case, if they were planning on doing something rather grotesque and evil, then I would think that posse comitatus was repealed because of that clause in their oath against both enemies, foreign and domestic. Mainly the domestic part, because there are terrorists that reside on our own soil, within our homes. We have traitors within our ranks. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being able to defend yourself and defend your honor and defend your country in that regard, to neutralize a threat from within. That's the whole purpose for that statement, at least the latter part of it, the domestic enemies. Now take a minute to think about what that might mean. What domestic enemies are they talking about there? What domestic enemies are they speaking of in that forum, where they're not talking about terrorists? They're talking about anyone who would be considered a traitor or a person who commits high treason. Now, that's not the same as what the federal government views as a traitor, or what the federal government views as someone who commits high treason. It's not the same. The military has a very different set of rules and a very, very different set of guidelines held to the highest and strictest standard that is different from anything we've ever seen in the public. And that I know to be true. There are some people that would argue with me about that, but the truth is the military, the boys in the green, our fellow comrades, you know what I'm saying? Our friends, our compatriots, those people that sacrifice their own individuality for a time to become a driving force for our economy, to become a driving force for our freedom and our country, to support what thousands of others have died for. Your right to say the things that you're saying, to do the things you're doing, you wouldn't be doing them if it weren't for the soldiers that have sacrificed their lives for those very rights and those privileges. You wouldn't have the right to do anything you're doing without their existence, because we would have been overrun by fascism or communism or socialism in such a way that it would regulate even the way you act in public. Take a look at China, for example, the social credit score. That's a pretty darn obvious result of complete social control. And the same with Scandinavia, or not Scandinavia, but Switzerland. It's the second time we've done that in a different video. But the Swiss have also done the same thing. If you look at what they're doing now in their social guidelines and how they're getting rid of cash, that can only work to the detriment. Say the computers go off. Say the computers in the bank shut down. Then all of the money you had in digital format is not accessible. You are now penniless. Even if you're a millionaire, you have nothing. Especially if the computers go down and all the files are erased. That's what would occur from time to time in a cashless environment. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but that is a possibility, and we need to be aware of that possibility for our own sake. The country that we live in needs to be the example. We need to lead by example. We need to do this and that and the other in the way of making sure the rest of the world sees how America does things. That way, when America is doing things the right way, then we can lead by example. And our military is no slouch to that fact. Our armed forces, all of them, they're not some force to be considered weak, or some force to be considered inoperable or brain dead or like the public at large. Come on. We as Americans have got to do better than that. We've got to do better than that. You need to understand the soldiers are there for you, for your protection. Even if they were to repeal Posse Comitatus, that's not meaning to say they're going to come out and shoot you. That's not part of their training. That's not part of their life force. What the soldier means, what it means to be a soldier for the armed forces, is not something that's bred in them. And I've had a long line of relatives, both all the way up to my father, that have been a servant to the armed forces and a servant to our country. And a fighter for your freedom, that stands up for your rights and your freedoms and your privileges that you experience today. Those things that you call your choices, your freedom and your rights, those things that you're fighting over, to call yourself a she or a he. The military fought for those rights because under social control and under complete totalitarian control and under the tyranny that existed in other parts of the world, you have no rights. You can't call yourself anything than what you've been born to be called. So you can't consider these sorts of things because these are now considered first world problems. And this transgender movement, I'm sorry, that's the least of our worries. That needs to be the last thing we talk about in the news, and yet it's everywhere. Even the parents that force their children to dress in drag, that's as despicable as being a party to someone being murdered just because they're a citizen, or just because they're female, or just because they may come from a different country than you, or because they may not have citizenship in America. We don't deserve the country we live in if you can't see the validity and the enormity of the immigrations that have occurred in our country, the amount of immigrants we've amassed over the centuries, how we've come to be what we are is because of immigration. It is because of other people from different countries, because we still offer the offering of life, the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. We offer that. That used to mean something, and now it's being curtailed to mean that, oh, because they're Spanish descent, they're Mexicans or whatever, whoever the hell come up with this idea that they're not welcome in our country is insane. Now they need to do it the right way. So just coming across the border and climbing a fence is obviously a dumb idea, because you've seen some of the things that happen in the news on that, because people fall to the other side of the fence and they get stuck or impaled by it. Not intelligent. Okay, don't do that. Don't climb the fence, because it can only end badly for you. There are some that get lucky. There are some that do. But then again, there are some that don't. And that's more the realm of what I'm speaking to. Those that aren't lucky, that don't come across the fence and have good outcomes. It's far better to apply for citizenship the legal way and come here the right way. Then you get a lot more agreeableness from the Americans when you do things the way that we're expected to be done. Because my family immigrated here, not very recently, but over the last couple hundred years or so, when the government was still forming in our country, we immigrated here. And I even have some relatives in the native end of our country. I'm also related to native tribesmen. So do I think on both sides? I think that my heritage speaks to a lot of that, which is the reason I have my views that I do, because I'm part immigrant and part native. Now, the reason I think this grandly on this subject is because we all need to know that there are some issues in our world that we have to resolve correctly, and we need to do this the right way. And you can't do these things by gagging yourself or putting a noose around your neck. You can't do that. So freedom of speech needs to be the most important thing we hold dear, along with the Second Amendment. Okay, we need to be able to overthrow a tyranny if it does come into being, and I don't think we're going to have that problem, especially not with the existence of our military. Even if we have a small force of them left in on our home soil, we're going to be okay. So the truth is, right, that most of this is fear porn, and it's tactics used to scare people into certain viewpoints. And just don't let them pull that fear card on you, because they will do it every single time if they think they can get a vote from you that can get them further down the line of what they want. And I don't know if you've noticed, but our president is completely against that idea. Completely against the idea of being coerced into a decision. He's a great deal maker. He's a billionaire. I mean, come on. Trump is a massively successful businessman. Even though he's had failures in the past, what businessman doesn't? What business model doesn't run into failure from time to time? It's what he's done with the occurrence of that failure and how he's moved past that needs to be looked at, rather than the focus on the failure. To look at what he has done from the happenings after that failure forward need to be brought to light more than the failure itself. Because to err is human, but to forgive is divine. And to make a mistake is human, but to learn from it is beyond what we are. That's the proof of our what word am I looking for? That's the proof of our intelligence and our education, our enlightened existence, because we can learn from our mistakes. We can pick up and move forward from our failures and not let that nail us to the coffin where we get dragged down by it. Just because some part of our country needs to die, that the figuratively die, not people, but figuratively death needs to occur to certain parts of this. I'm using the wrong example here. So I'm going to say, okay, a better example would be a crucible, all right? You throw in wood into the fire. What is burnt away is the weakness that existed in our country. What's left over is pure. And what's left over from that crucible is what we need to look to for the future. And it's not something that we need to allow to occur on its own, but we've got to help probably more, I guess, push this along in such a way that we can actually get something done now. Not for the future, because our kids, the progeny we're creating today, are less intelligent than our forefathers were, than we are, because of the the rule of inbreeding and genetic diversity does create less intelligent quotients or less IQ variables or variances at each generation if there's more inbreeding present. If there's less genetic diversity, you get less intelligent people that come from that breeding process. That's true. That's known in genetics, and that's also something that occurs. But the people that are lesser born with lesser IQ scores or have a learning disability can move around it, can become as intelligent as our predecessors, as our forefathers. We can become as intelligent as they were by learning from them, by reading their books, by reading their history, by understanding history in a sense that we know it does not need to repeat itself for us to learn the accessibility of our failures today. We don't need to go down the same path as so many people have pointed out. We don't need to allow socialism to occur in our country to know it's a bad thing. We don't need to allow this to occur. And we can stop it in its tracks as long as we know the proper way to do things. And the proper way to do things is to think about it, to offer discourse, and to pursue the most non-lethal method of taking down this source of control that does nothing but bring us to detriment and destruction. And even God called order to chaos with just his voice. God did that with just his voice. So I want to leave you with that to think on. What can you do with your voice? If it's silenced, you can do nothing. So we need to not resort to violence, people. We need to use our voice as God did to lay this chaos to waste, to call it to order. That's what we have to do. Thank you for your time, and I hope you subscribe and like this video. This has been Rayne. Thanks so much. Have a good one, guys. It's been real.